Today, there seems to be a widespread belief that aesthetics should change over time. Architecture looks totally different today than it did 150 years ago. And it is not just architecture. Lampposts, statues, paintings, drainpipes and fences look nothing like they did before. If someone were to take some of these old designs and use them today, the common criticism would be that they look out of place, that we need to build for today and not be stuck in nostalgia. Even people who argue for new traditional architecture often add that we should find new traditional or ornamental styles rather than copying the old ones. In this video, I would like to explore where this belief came from and whether it actually makes sense. The idea that architecture has to visibly break with the past in order to belong to its own age is relatively new. I trace it back to an early 19th century debate between Gothic revivalists and classicists. By the end of the 18th century, architecture had become heavily focused on copying the ancient Greeks and Romans. Architects would travel to Greece, make measured drawings of ruins, publish those drawings, and then architects across Europe and the Americas would copy the ornament and proportions onto their own new buildings. This was challenged by the Gothic revival movement. They argued that instead we should copy Gothic buildings because Gothic architecture was more closely related to the Christian culture of the time than pagan Greek and Roman buildings. As the debate continued, Gothic revivalists attacked classical architecture as dishonest. To them, it was a language of wooden construction, repeated in stone. They argued that the materials of the early 19th century were stone and brick, and that architecture should therefore use forms that worked efficiently in those materials. For them, that meant Gothic arches and vaults rather than stone beams placed between columns. When iron was introduced later in the century, it was commonly agreed that an iron structure should be slimmer than a stone one because it was simply a much stronger material. At first, they would try to keep a familiar look. Lampposts emerged that were basically slim classical columns. Iron train sheds took the form of massive barrel vaults. Even iron suspension bridges would be dressed up in familiar stone architecture. The philosophy was familiar forms adjusted to new materials. This was not ignorance about new materials. Even simple buildings like pubs at the time were made to look like romanticized medieval structures belonging to an architecture hundreds of years older. So it was believed at the time that new technology, dressed up in old forms, would bring comfort to a population exposed to rapid technological change. All this copying of the past was becoming increasingly cheap. Ornaments could now be mass-produced in factories, and what had once been classical ornament for a palace started appearing on houses for the middle class. This made the 19th century beautiful, but it also made it harder to stand out. Beauty was no longer as strong a status symbol, and we entered an era where creativity started to matter more than beauty. At first, this worked well. Art Nouveau and Art Deco were creative styles, and most people still love them today. These styles looked forward, and they matched our current philosophy about art. In painting, artists like Van Gogh, Monet, and later Picasso also innovated very successfully. A new theory of art emerged in which creativity became much more important than beauty. Art history started to emphasize innovation, whereas before the goal had been more to create the most perfect picture, the most perfect statue, or the most perfect building. This new movement increasingly came with the idea that new technologies needed new forms. The argument was that ornament used to have a function. Some details helped move rainwater away from the wall. Others helped frame and protect windows, doors, or the edges of a building. But now, many of these functions could be achieved through new technology, and because of that, ornament was no longer needed, was the idea. Another theory was that art needs to create some friction. It needs to make people think. The perfect image, in full harmony, became almost the definition of kitsch, and the opposite increasingly became the goal for artists. Art became more and more about shocking people. There may be some truth in this theory of friction,
but how much friction should there be compared to harmony?
Now, fast forward 100 years, and many people who are not trained in the arts are starting to question modern aesthetics, especially in architecture. We wonder what is wrong. But at the same time, we still believe that art should be creative, and most of us are afraid that our taste will be called kitsch. So even if we love the interior of Versailles, we would probably be hesitant to recreate it in our own living rooms. Most people in this debate argue for new styles. Many experts trained in the arts see nothing wrong with the current state, and they are still fiercely against looking back and copying the past. Those who do see a problem usually argue for new design theories, based on things like eye-tracking studies or research into forms. In other words, a new look for a new age. This is a compromise that most people can support philosophically, but it is still unclear what this new look is actually going to be. However, this debate about modern aesthetics has been going on for 50 years, and haven't we answered it unsuccessfully each time by designing a new look that ended up being mostly unloved by the general public? We went from Bauhaus to Brutalism to Postmodernism. We tried bright colours and strange forms. So if we are unhappy with current architecture, should we really try yet another new style without changing the underlying philosophy of creativity and moving forward? Perhaps this time is different, but I think a deeper philosophical discussion might be needed. When you look at history, there is one era where innovation led to widely beloved new styles: the end of the 19th century and the start of the 20th century. Art Nouveau and Art Deco were new, and more importantly, they are still widely beloved today. Art at the time had a similar track record. We still love Van Gogh, Monet, and Picasso. These artists were somewhat abstract, but not fully abstract. So perhaps we need to look at what this era thought about art. Maybe we should study its philosophy and use that to find a new way forward. For architecture, I think the perfect place to start is Beaux-Arts teaching. Many people may think Beaux-Arts only refers to the highly ornamented classical style known by that name. But before it was a style, it was a system of architectural training at a school in Paris. And this school did not just produce the architects who helped build the Paris we all love today. It also trained many of the early pioneers of Art Nouveau and Art Deco. I just finished making a new annotated version of the textbook used in that school at the time, The Elements and Theory of Architecture, by Julien Guadet. Guadet believed in moving forward, but not just for the sake of moving forward. He always started with the forms of the past, and he recognized that these forms are not just functional, they also communicate. Forms tell us how a building stands and what civilization that building belongs to. Guadet was skeptical of forms that rely on unnaturally strong materials to stand because they go against our human intuition of safety. He was comfortable with copying the past, but not copying every last detail without any practical adjustment. He was okay with Roman columns 1400 years after the fall of the Roman Empire, but he was against recreating a picturesque medieval square that was created by time rather than by a single architect. It is a compromise between the classical and modern world, and I think it is worth considering today. However, the 19th century may not hold all the answers for our aesthetic situation. We have different technologies, different building requirements, and different cost structures. But in one way, we are at a surprisingly similar point to the late 19th century. Innovation and change are rapid. Back then, the Industrial Revolution, railroads, electricity, and eventually cars changed everything. Today, it is AI and digitization. Most people are uncomfortable about the future and about their role in it as they watch much change around them. In the 19th century, they tried to navigate this period by making the built environment look as familiar as possible, and we still love it today. Perhaps we can try the same. If you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe. You can also follow me on X. And if you are interested in my annotated version of Julien Guadet's The Elements and Theory of Architecture, scan the QR code for more information or find a direct link to Amazon in the video description. You can also watch my video summarizing Guadet's 3 core principles. You should find a link on your screen or the video description.